Subcommittee will come to order. Good morning, everyone. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. Today's joint subcommittee hearing is convening with Homeland Security Subcommittee on Transportation and Maritime Security on how the Coast Guard is handling complaints of harassment and bullying. I ask unanimous consent that Congressman Joe Courtney of Connecticut be allowed to sit with the subcommittee on the dais to ask questions of the witnesses and to participate fully in this hearing. And without objection, so ordered. I will now make my opening statement before I turn to the ranking member. Welcome, everyone, to today's joint hearing with the Committee on Oversight and Reform Subcommittee on Civil Liberties and Civil Rights and the Committee on Homeland Security Subcommittee on Transportation and Maritime Security. I want to first start by saying our subcommittee has been actively involved in working on ways to stop hate violence. So I was dispirited to read the news of yet another anti-Semitic lethal attack which took place in New Jersey several hours ago. We send the victims' families our sympathy and our solidarity. Today's investigation was spearheaded by Chairman Benny Thompson, who leads the Committee on Homeland Security, and by our own late Chairman Elijah Cummings in close consultation with Connecticut Representative Courtney. Chairman Cummings served as the chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee's subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation for 4 years. He was deeply troubled by the results of a 2017 report finding inequitable outcomes for minority cadets, including lower graduation rates and higher levels of discipline. Elijah was also disturbed by the Inspector General's finding that a member of the military assigned to the Coast Guard Academy faculty suffered retaliation for reporting harassment and bullying, and he wanted to know what was being done to address the retaliation and to ensure that the allegations were being handled properly. The findings of the committee's joint investigation are now clear. Coast Guard military leadership has failed to promptly, thoroughly, and impartially address harassment, bullying, and retaliation allegations at the Academy. Furthermore, Coast Guard leadership has refused to hold anyone accountable for these systemic failures. Lieutenant Commander Kimberly Young McClear, who will testify today, is a faculty member at the Coast Guard Academy. She served in the Coast Guard for 16 years, holds a PhD in systems engineering, and is on the permanent faculty there. She is among the very best our nation has to offer. In 2016, Lieutenant Commander Young McClear alleged she was suffering harassment and bullying. Her allegations were handled through the Coast Guard's anti-harassment process. However, rather than promptly and impartially determining whether or not her allegations were true, the Coast Guard swept her allegations under the rug. A senior officer then communicated to her that her allegations had been investigated 3 times and that each time the allegations were not substantiated. That was not accurate. The Coast Guard had not investigated any of these allegations fully, but the Coast Guard spread this misinformation far and wide, sowing doubt among Lieutenant Commander Young McClear's colleagues about the legitimacy of her complaints, further isolating her from her peers in the workplace. Nevertheless, she persisted and took her allegations to the Office of the Deputy Commandant for mission support. The Coast Guard finally conducted an investigation that verified her complaint of bullying and found that she had suffered work interference and her performance had been undermined, and yet senior Coast Guard officials inexplicably concluded that her allegations were unsubstantiated. Finally, to add injury to insult, Lieutenant Commander Young McClear was retaliated against for making the original allegations of harassment and bullying. Anti-harassment and anti-bullying processes can be effective only if complainants can trust that the complaints will be handled properly. The many failures identified by our investigation send a clear signal to Coast Guard personnel that coming forward with allegations of harassment or bullying is pointless and even potentially damaging to one's career. I also want to note that our staff reached out to the manager who allegedly harassed and bullied the lieutenant commander, but he refused to speak with our committees. I would like to thank Lieutenant Commander Young McClear for her service to our nation and her bravery in speaking out and being here with us today. I also want to thank the Office of the Inspector General for their work on this issue. Unfortunately, despite our repeated requests for his testimony, the Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Carl Schultz, refused to attend this hearing or to account for whether the Coast Guard will act to ensure that no other Coast Guard member suffers as Lieutenant Commander Young McClear has suffered. According to the Coast Guard Civil Rights Manual, quote, command leadership is ultimately responsible for the Coast Guard's civil rights outcomes, unquote. The Commandant is the ultimate leader of the Coast Guard. His refusal to appear here today casts doubt on how seriously the Coast Guard is taking the disturbing findings of the Inspector General and of this committee. But rest assured, we take it very seriously, as our late beloved colleague Elijah Cummings did. We will continue to take it seriously, and we will insist on the systematic changes that are necessary to address all of the efficiencies we have identified and to make certain that this anti-harassment policy is real. With that, I happily yield now to Mr. Roy.